With Governor Jerry Brown termed out in 2018, the race is already on to replace him. Two former big city mayors, former San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom and former LA Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, have already declared. But one of the early surprises has been the strength of another candidate for governor, State Treasurer John Chiang. What would be the goals of a Governor Chiang administration? And more importantly, how would he go about accomplishing those goals? A discussion with candidate for governor, State Treasurer John Chiang.
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world. Chevron's Coalinga oil field and Fresno County have been doing side by side for over 100 years. Learn more at doers.com. From the California Channel at the State Capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. Governor Jerry Brown is termed out in 2018. Among those who'd like to replace him is our guest, State Treasurer John Chiang. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Excited to be here. Thank you.
Well, so tell us, why do you want to be governor?
Well, this state is one of exceptional people, exceptional achievement, and I want to make sure that we continue on that pathway. So my background, the only person who served in all three funding and finance offices for the state, giving us a strong and working on building a strong financial foundation to do the aspirational work. How do we provide world-class education? How do we build more affordable housing? How do we create the jobs of the 21st century? How do we invest in people's future? So I think I bring that best expertise to make sure that that dream is possible for all Californians.
It all comes down to money, and you've been doing this for a while. So may I call you John?
Yes, please.
So John, let me ask you this. How do you make that vision a reality? I mean, it really is, all this costs money. Where are you going to find it?
Well, you have to be smart. I think I've demonstrated that. When we had the financial crisis in 2009, I was the state elected official who stood up to the institutions, both the former governor and to the legislature controlled by members of my party.
And what did Governor Schwarzenegger try to do in 2009 that you stood up to?
Well, the governor wanted to pay the public servants of California federal minimum wage, right? That was a time of great recession. The state lost 1.3 million jobs. You know, the good workers here in Fresno and elsewhere. Why would you want to pay them federal minimum wage? How are they going to pay for their health care? How are they going to pay for their transportation? How are they going to pay for the clothes on their kids' back? How are they going to pay for, rent or a mortgage? You don't do that to good, hard-working Californians.
That got you a big profile in 2009 when that happened.
Well, most importantly, it was the right thing to do.
So go on with your ideas in terms of how do you make this vision a reality in terms of finances? I mean, people don't like taxes. A lot of people think, oh, just fraud, waste, and abuse, we can save money that way. And there is some savings there, but it's not enough to pay for some of the bigger ideas.
Well, we're going to have to be smart about it. And so part of that is the identifying fraud, waste, and abuse. As the state controller, I was the most successful auditor in California history. I identified about $9.5 billion of waste. But part of that is the lessons learned from that. You know, what do we do in regards to better practices in regards to healthcare? A lot of inefficiencies, a lot of waste, right? So let's quit wasting that money, and you can provide additional services. Not everything you need, but doing things in a much better way. Audited the redevelopment agencies, right, because there was waste there. I want to bring those back, but we need local governments to have the economic development tools so that they can grow their economies, local economies, to make sure that they have a tool for building more affordable housing.
You know, it was interesting, back in the day when you were doing this, the state was undergoing tremendous, it was a recession, and the deficits were huge. $20 billion kind of deficits. Things have certainly changed.
Well, we deferred payments to education by $10 billion. And that's why I told the legislature and governor, get the numbers right, because you have kids who are going to schools that are in terrible condition, right? Teachers are getting pink slips, morale is terrible. So you need somebody who's going to be smart, who's going to be an adult in the room to say, we got to come together to make the difficult decisions. Every day Californians make tough decisions, and their legislative and executive branch leadership needs to do the same thing.
Well, let me ask you this. You're running against your main opponents seem to be two Democratic former mayors, San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom and former LA Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. You've described them as stylish and suggesting that you're more of a workhorse than a show horse. So what about your specific leadership style distinguishes you from them?
Yeah, I think passion, advocacy, energy. Look at the issues and who are working on them today. Right, as you interview me, I've been pushing very aggressively for the past 3 weeks to get the legislature to up the bond to build more affordable housing. Right, I'm not talking about as governor, I'm going to do this. I'm doing it today. As the state treasurer, I've increased in my first 2.5 years building affordable housing by 80%. Right, that's the leadership that people want today. I can go into communities throughout the state of California say, I'm not going to promise you, look, you have a roof over your head today because I pushed aggressively as your state treasurer.
You know, another thing I want to ask you is, you know, it's widely acknowledged that California really is a tale of two states. You know, the coastal areas, urban areas are doing quite well. The inland areas, not so much when it comes to poverty, unemployment, crime, educational attainment, health outcomes, air quality, water quality. How do you address that disparity?
Yeah, that's absolutely unacceptable, right? In the world's sixth largest economy, we've made great progress. But, you know, a statement about who we are and our vision and our hopes, we have to make sure that everybody's included. I believe I was the first state elected official to do free income taxes for middle income and low income folks. As governor, I want to make sure that everybody gets those services. And when I was in controller, my previous position, right, I did not leave the Central Valley abandoned. I had my staff come up here. If you worked for me and you had public interaction, you had to be tax trained. I wanted to make sure that local individuals and communities got that type of assistance. What do we do in regards to helping train them to understand the tax and finance laws for the entrepreneurs? Right? We have a lot of young, bright people engaged in technology in the Central Valley, a lot of agricultural technology. How do we help them become successful?
Okay, well, up next, we're going to talk about some of the hot button issues in California today. You mentioned one of them earlier, affordable housing. We're also going to talk about adequate infrastructure. You can think roads and water on that one. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. My name is Mark Keppler. I'm with the Maddy Institute, and we're talking with State Treasurer John Chiang, candidate for governor, about some current issues the state's dealing with. First big issue we already mentioned earlier was affordable housing. Seems to be a basic issue there of whether the state government should spend more money to address the problem with bonds or tax credits. You mentioned RDAs, redevelopment agencies, or should the government focus on regulatory reform, things like amending CEQA, the environmental law? What do you think?
So the answer is yes. We have to do it.
I thought you might say both.
It requires everything,
right?
There is no single magical solution that addresses the complexity of affordable housing. We know that rural housing issues can be oftentimes very different than urban or suburban housing. So we need all of the above approach to address these types of issues. So yes, redevelopment agencies, giving the tools for local governments. Yes, more bond capacity to make sure that we address the backlog. We're 1.5 million units short in our great state. Yes, we need to move these projects along faster to try to bring local government officials and their local homeowners to say we do need to make sure that we take care of our kids and teachers.
I'm sorry, you were talking about the bond issue. What do you think? What are your thoughts on in terms of how large that bond should be, bond package?
So it's at $3 billion. We think we're going to make progress on that, but if we can get to 6 to 9, that would be a huge win, right? But anything in between, as long as we continue to make progress, we can't continue to slow down our economy to put up these barriers by not having insufficient housing. Anywhere you go in this state, you hear from the big corporations and local business owners, we can't hire people because housing's just too inaccessible. Yeah,
it's particularly affecting the lower and middle income people because actually those are the ones that are leaving the state. Rich people are moving in. But it's the middle and lower income people that are moving out because they can't afford the housing. And the LAO, Legislative Analyst Office, did a report and they found that if you're trying to take care of the 1.7 million poorest people so they can afford homes, you're going to have to spend $15 to $30 billion a year. So it ain't just money alone, it's also maybe regulatory reform as well, as you mentioned.
Yes.
There was a report that you received about $100,000 in campaign contributions from developers over the years for bond financing on a committee that you're involved with. And I want to make clear there's no evidence of any quid pro quo, any corruption, anything like that, but are you concerned about the mere appearance of a conflict that might undermine your credibility in some way?
Yeah, as you pointed out, that story is untrue and irresponsible, right? There is no evidence because that is in fact a false story. I've been pushing aggressively for the last 10 years to build more affordable housing. Yes, I've been an advocate, so there are some developers who do support me. But nonprofit communities, I have a whole bunch of people who are very passionate about this particular issue. I sit on an authority where there's 3 members. The votes for the last 2.5 years have been 100% where the governor's representative, the controller, and I voted the same.
Unanimous?
Yeah, so we followed staff recommendation. Am I supposed to vote against staff recommendation? Right.
Okay, so just so our viewers and listeners understand, so it comes to you as a recommendation from staff.
Yes.
And then you basically just have approved what staff have suggested.
Right, and it's a scoring system, right? So if you do this, you get a point, right? So if you do purple pipes, you get a point. If you build facilities for children.
No,
You
you're
get
already
a point.
proving you're a policy wonk by saying the word purple pipe. Because most people, okay, but what does that mean? That means repurposed water for median islands and parks and things of that nature.
To better use water.
Right. So let's talk about highways and roads for a second. Another major infrastructure issue for California, seems to be that we have a car culture here. People like driving on roads or highways. What's your position on that new $5.2 billion transportation tax?
I supported it. We need the money for infrastructure. I know it can be so hard for so many people who are trying to make it the additional tax, right? But it's infrastructure is critical for this state. We have to make sure that we have good highways, but it impacts quality of life. We don't want trucks stalled because there's massive potholes on the street. We don't want individuals stuck because there's too much congestion. We want parents to get home to take their kids to their soccer matches.
But a lot of this is for maintenance and rehabilitation,
Yes.
not so much for expansion.
Yes.
So what about mass transit, taking some of those people out of their cars, perhaps, in the right situations? What are your feelings about mass transit and maybe high-speed rail? What are your thoughts on that?
And so I support it. The gas tax also goes for mass transit. It also goes to upgrade and protect 500 bridges in this state. We don't want that to revisit that disaster of Minneapolis from a couple decades ago where you had
The bridge collapsed, yeah.
And people died.
Yeah. Another infrastructure issue, the perennial issue of water, never goes away. So, a lot of places were devastated by the drought, particularly places like the Central Valley. So do you support more dams? If so, where?
I think we have to be open to surface storage, right? We want to make sure that we use it effectively. So whether we're looking at, Northern California, Central Valley, whether we do upgrades so that you don't have the runoff like San Luis Reservoir, we don't want to see that type of waste. So how do we prioritize that type of infrastructure, including surface storage?
Well, I have to ask you about the Delta Plan. The governor's what's called the California Water Fix, $17 billion Delta Plan. Where are you on that?
I think there's a process underway, right? You had the scientific review, right? Part of it is going to be a conversation, and there's going to be some plans coming forward next month as to how you pay for all of that. Let's take in all the data. Let's see if we can balance the concerns. Let's try to get responsible people to the table and see what's best.
Okay, so where does the state treasurer and gubernatorial candidate John Chiang stand on other perennial issues such as crime, poverty, jobs, and education? We're going to have that conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. So let's talk about an issue that seems to be uppermost in the voters' minds when it comes to what government should do. That's public safety. Long-term crime trends in California are actually down, but there's been a recent uptick in some crime statistics. So is this a one-off anomaly, or is this something more?
So we need to research it. Obviously, we passed a couple major revisions to California's criminal justice program, and so we have to see
a pretty significant shift. I mean, it went from kind of this throw everybody in jail, frankly, the 3 strikes thing, to a different starting in 2010 with realignment and those kinds of things. Pretty big change.
Yeah. So as with any public policy, we should monitor and see what the actual community effects are, right? And is there a causal relationship, or is this something that's correlational?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You read the PolitiFact or the LAO, and they say, well, there are blips. These things go up and down. You can't really make a decision based on a one-year blip. You got to see if the trend emerges. And so I guess that's one thing we're going to have to look at.
You would know. You're in public policy. You're researching it.
The Public Policy Institute of California says that almost 4 in 10 Californians live at or near poverty. And actually, those rates are actually higher in places like the Central Valley. And the thing that's interesting about that is that may actually get worse as baby boomers retire, because a lot of them don't have retirement income. So there's been this thing called Secure Choice, which is an idea to create a state-administered pension plan for private employees. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a huge advocate. I chair the board. So last year, I went back to the White House with our Senate President Pro Tem, lobbied our senators, lobbied members of Congress, and the Department of Labor so that we could try to make sure that this plan is effective in state. You have 7.34 million Californians who work, but they don't have any type of retirement security. And so we wanted to make it easier for employers who don't have a type of plan, for them to tell their employees or share with their employees that this plan is available. And so we want to make sure that the 6.8 million Californians who qualify for this particular program can understand it if they choose to participate, provide them with a pathway to save money so that they could have a golden future.
Are you worried at all about liability for the state on this?
So there is no state liability, right? This isn't like some of the other plans. This is sort of like an IRA. So the state's not liable for your individual IRA. The state wouldn't be liable for this program.
I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but they say that if you have a situation where the people are already in the program but have to opt out, much higher usage rates than if you have to have someone opt in. Has that been thought about at all?
Yeah, so it's right. When you opt out, there's as you just pointed out, there's huge, great numbers who choose to participate.
Right.
Part of this, the positives attributes of this program is that we've simplified the program for individuals. There are so many financial products, it's intimidating for so many people. They don't know what the management or the administrative fees are, so we've tried to simplify it for people.
Right, I actually, when I first started, I had all my money in the bank, and my brother would say, "What are you doing? You know, you're not making any money in the stock market." I don't know how the stock market works, so I was unsure. Finally, I did, so that's a good thing. It's actually Fidelity, I think I read recently, came out with a report that the average Fidelity investor has only $100,000 saved for retirement. And if you think about the cost of living in California, it's not going to go very far.
Yeah, they used to, I don't want to get too technical, but the old 4% rule, it wouldn't go very far.
Right, right. So let's talk about this two-tier economy that seems to exist in California. We talked a little about it earlier. You know, unemployment rates in the San Joaquin Valley are twice as high as those in the Bay Area. Indeed, 8 of the 10 metro areas in the nation with the worst unemployment are in California. What needs to be done to correct that economic imbalance?
Education, housing, jobs. So we talked about housing, so we don't have to revisit that conversation. But we need to make sure that we have jobs that are more expansive, more inclusive for individuals. What's different about my work versus the others, I'm already working on investing in jobs here in the Central Valley. As the state treasurer, I chair 12 different economic development authorities. We're trying to bring clean and green jobs. We're trying to make it better for financing for agricultural. I've done a lot of work internationally, there's interested people from Asia who are interested in buying more products from the Central Valley, so bringing those connections and creating greater economic opportunities. And then education. Clearly every child needs to get a world-class education, right? They will hit a ceiling that is very low unless they get access to the skills, the knowledge, the people who will help them succeed.
You know, it's interesting, an electric car company manufacturer just opened up a facility in Hanford in the Central Valley, which is really kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I had worked with them.
Yeah, so it's so the green jobs might be a way out for some regions. So we were talking about education. I want to talk to you a little bit about that. We all agree that the future success of the state really is dependent on all students being successful. And so how do we ensure that historically underserved students like the Latino students that make up more than half of California's public schools, or those $1.4 million English learners, are prepared for the 21st century?
So we're going to have to first work with our local representatives and having them articulate much louder because there's concerns back about Washington, D.C. removing funding for programs, especially for lower income individuals under Title I. Number two, when I challenge the legislature and governor, it's about consistent budgeting, right? You can't have the volatility, especially the poor districts that have less financial wherewithal, right? They are the ones that are most impacted. And then
do you think the local control funding formula is a good idea?
It's a good start. I want to make sure we make appropriate adjustments, especially for kids with special needs. A lot of people don't care about those who have some of the larger challenges, and it hurts a lot of the school districts who have to provide the services and programs to assist kids with special needs.
Well, we're covering a lot of ground. We're going to cover a little more ground in a moment when we talk with gubernatorial candidate John Chiang. In that conversation in a moment, this is the Maddy Report. Welcome back to the Maddy Report. My name is Mark Keppler. I'm with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with California gubernatorial candidate, State Treasurer John Chiang, about some of the long-term issues he's likely to confront if he's elected governor of California. One of them is immigration, big issue. What's your position on sanctuary city, school, state?
Well, I'm a huge believer in immigration, right? But we have to make sure that we have smart, sound immigration policies. We have to make sure that we protect the rights of those who are doing the right thing, but we also have to have a proper balance of public safety.
Let me ask you this. This is a federal issue, so you really wouldn't be dealing with it as governor, but what are your thoughts on immigration quotas? Should we decide who gets into the United States?
Well, in a sense, we set the criteria, but as long as we have a balanced approach, right? I know they're talking about those who come who are very wealthy, but we also have it here in the heartland of the state of California, those who don't necessarily have a lot of wealth, but who are making massive contributions. You're not going to have a millionaire work the fields.
You think about some of the immigrants that have come to the Valley over the years, Armenians, Mexicans, add a lot of value to the economy.
Massive value.
Yeah, so let me ask you another big issue, is healthcare. I'm hitting you with all the big issues. There's some talk about how do we control the escalating cost of healthcare. There's also some discussion about how do we make sure there's even access, because it's very uneven in the state. What's your prescription to fix what ails California's healthcare system? Well,
I've been working on it today. We know that there's great concern with the federal government possibly removing some of those funds. One of the things that I did in the first half of this calendar year is to work on trying to provide some sources of funding for community clinics. That would impact Fresno and the surrounding region. 1 in every 7 Californians gets their health care from a community clinics, and because those clinics are in financial peril under a current president's administration, we have to make sure that we preserve that access. And then, how are we smarter with the financing? Tackling the inefficiencies, tackling overpriced pharmaceuticals, better delivery of services to reduce the cost.
Yeah, medical technology might be a way to really reduce the cost there. If we could just, take those records and computerize them instead of just by hand and stuff. But I want to ask also about single payer. It's a big issue.
Yes.
Where are you on single payer?
So I think it's a great idea. My parents come from a country where they have it, so it's very popular, but they also have cost control issues. So we have to be smart because we want to make sure that we can pay for the system. But if we're going to drive out a lot of those inefficiencies, other types of costs, single payer, if Medicare for all those types of ideas are positive ideas.
Yeah, it seems like you could just look around the world, see what systems work, and then kind of do best practices and apply something here. But that's a huge issue.
Yeah, so we pay the most and get mediocre results.
And people are very surprised by that.
Yeah.
That we pay about twice as much per person compared to other similarly developed countries. Yet our health outcomes, when it talks about mortality and those kinds of things, are they're not top like people think they are. Let me kind of switch gears a little bit. Climate change. Over 97% of all actively publishing climate scientists, according to NASA, agree that climate warming trends are due to human activities. By the way, I found it interesting. Only 94% of all scientists think that smoking will cause cancer. So this is actually higher than that. I thought it was kind of interesting. But studies also report that California produces only about 1% of all global emissions. So how do you balance dealing with the issue of climate change, but also not harming the California economy in the process?
We have to do both, right? So we can continue to grow the economy, right? We have 500,000 jobs that are tied to it. So we're putting us on the proper pathway to address these issues. We're the state that's going to be impacted by sea level rise, so I push for legislation to make sure we monitor it. And then I'm pushing today for green bonds. How do we finance growing the economy? How do we finance cleaner infrastructure? What we can use for water? What we can do for smart roadways, that when you think about autonomous vehicles or electrical vehicles. So we can be smart about it and balance both economic growth and environmental considerations.
Any concerned about Bakersfield? I mean, it's a big Kern County, big oil place. Concerned about what impact it may have on them?
Yeah, it's obviously going to have some challenges, especially to people of color. So we're going to have to find a balance where what other types of economic growth activities we can create in areas that will be impacted with the change with fossil fuels.
Let me ask this last question, and that's on unfunded liability when it comes to public employee pensions. And the other issue is not even talked about is public employee retirement costs. Is the state going to be able to meet those obligations?
So I think I've been the one state elected official who's spoken about it consistently for the last 10 years, right? In my first year as the controller, I said, let's study that OPEB and how much it's going to cost. And when I did that first year study, it would cost us $32 billion, the taxpayers of California. Today, that obligation is $76 billion. I pushed aggressively to say the state needs to start paying all of its bills on a timely basis.
Let's just put that in context. So $72 billion, how large is the state budget?
$76 billion. So the general fund budget is about $125 billion, and
so it just shows you how big that liability is.
Yeah, and the overall budget's over $180 billion.
Right. So it's a big issue, and that's something you're going to be looking at, would be addressing?
I pushed for it, and the governor has taken positive action on it.
Okay, very good. Well, I want to thank State Treasurer and California Gubernatorial candidate John Chiang for joining us. If you want to stay current on state and local politics, you can follow the Maddy Institute on Facebook, Twitter, or log on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.